Good afternoon, Club 17. It's good to be back together again, and always good to be together. We've got a great program today, and we're going to start things off with the Pledge of Allegiance. John Farmeyer is going to lead us. And we're now going to have the invocation and four-way test. Jim Hudson's going to lead us.
Thank you, Brett. I left the office today. I was just looking forward, even from a distance, to be able to see some friendly faces. So glad you could make it today. Why don't we bow our heads and pray real quick? And let's pray. Lord, we thank you for the opportunity to gather today, and we sincerely pray for your blessings on our meeting. Help all of us in this club, those here today and those who can't make it with us physically, to see those in need and give us strength and wisdom to serve our community as we should. Help us to lift the burdens of others while we maintain the dignity of all humankind. Soften our hearts to be sensitive and loving as we serve together as Rotarians. And may this food we eat be a blessing to our body and the conversation to our souls. Amen. And let's remember and say together the four-way test. Is it the truth? To all concerns, will it build goodwill and better friendships? Will it be beneficial to all concerns? Thank you.
Thank you, Jim. Thank you. And now we're going to have Molly Rydell is going to introduce our visitors and guests today.
Good morning, everyone. We have one guest today. I'm very happy to welcome Mrs. Christy Armstrong, who is Pete Armstrong's wife. So let's give her a warm Rotary welcome. Welcome, Christy.
And it's Rydell, I know. Rydell. I did. Well, I'll get it wrong at the beginning or at the end, one place or the other. So we have a bunch of announcements today, just to catch up the club. First of all, we have a lot of birthdays. So hold your applause, but Peter Baden, Mike Brendamore, Dan Grunberg, Arnie Behringer, Heather Hawkins, Mary Helen Richter, Hux Miller, and Angie Fisher. Wish them a happy birthday. And just a reminder, club dues were actually due yesterday, and normally we would have a $35 late fee assessed as of yesterday, but we have a grace period, so if you can get your dues in, for those who haven't paid yet, by tomorrow at 5 o'clock, we'll waive the late fee. And we appreciate everybody who's renewed their membership, and appreciate the fact that we've got people who are with the club during this turbulent time that we're still in the midst of. Exciting thing, we've been announcing our first hands-on service project of the year, and that is going to be this Saturday at 9 o'clock at the Norwood schools, at the Norwood Middle School. Bill Stilley is right there, he's in charge. We have space for more to help, if you would like to help and you haven't signed up, let Bill know. And if you have a prospective member, friend you'd like to bring along, that's fine too. And we will have the right social distancing, and I've been assured that it'll be just the right temperature for that project. So, silent auction for Believe to Achieve. The Believe to Achieve Silent Auction Committee is excited to open early bidding for 2 items through ClickBid, and the bidding will start next week for 1 week only. The 2 items are a 2-bedroom villa for September 27th to October 4th in Orlando, and also a Cincinnati staycation package that includes 4 single-day admissions passes to Coney Island, 2 single-day passes to Kings Island, 2-hour trail ride for 4 riders at Camp Ernst, and a $75 gift card to the Yard House restaurant. So a nice package. Just stay tuned to E-Raise next week, and our Facebook page for the club, and you'll see more about how to bid on those. And on an entirely different topic, many of us watched Governor DeWine's address yesterday to the people of Ohio, encouraging us all to stay on course on wearing a mask every time we go out in public. As Rotarians, we do believe in service above self. We want to do our part in protecting the community, and we know we can make a difference as we do. So our club will continue to follow all the stated public health guidelines. And members in the news, happy 40th wedding anniversary to Steve Rogers and his wife Carol. And on a sadder note, please keep past President Jack Scott and his wife Sue in your prayers and thoughts as they mourn the loss of Jack's mother. Please also keep Judy Pogue and her family in your thoughts and prayers as they mourn the loss of Judy's father, Earl Gusweiler. And on another sad note, our club's former longtime executive director, Jeannie Hayes, passed away yesterday. A memorial will be held at a later date, and that will be announced as soon as it's available. She was also an honorary member of our club as well. So please keep Jeannie's family in your thoughts and prayers. And now I'd like to introduce our speaker for today. And we very much appreciate having John Fox, who is the editor-in-chief of Cincinnati Magazine. John has been reporting on the life in Cincinnati ever since the early 1990s. He co-founded Cincinnati City Beat in 1994, serving as editor and co-publisher of the free weekly newspaper until 2012. He joined 3CDC to program and open Washington Park, immersing himself in over-the-Rhine's culture of change, which he then covered extensively as managing editor of Soapbox Media from 2014 to 2016. And as editor-in-chief at Cincinnati Magazine, he oversees all the editorial operations and digital efforts. And John grew up in Philadelphia. That's where my wife and I moved from before we came here. He moved here 30 years ago for a job. He and his wife have 2 children. Their oldest is a daughter at University of Southern California, and they have a son who's a junior at Walnut Hills High School. John, we're really happy you could join us today. Looking forward to what you're going to share. Please join me in welcoming John to our club today.
Thank you for having me. Thank you. I appreciate it. I'm happy to be here. I'm actually happy to be anywhere. Like a lot of you, getting out of the house. Not a lot of opportunities to do that. So this is awesome. I thought that I would give you a little bit of background about the magazine, but specifically talk to you about our current issue, which is our July issue, which is the one that's out now, that focuses on the COVID-19 situation and how we came to decide how to cover this, and then certainly open it up to any kind of questions if anybody wants to talk about media coverage of the pandemic, media coverage of anything, and just where we sort of go from here as a community, because clearly there are more questions than there are answers at this point, but we're all out there working together for it. So let me just start by giving you a little background, maybe a little insight into the magazine. The magazine's been around since 1967. It originally started by the Chamber of Commerce, but after about 10 years, it was spun off as an independent magazine, and it has been owned by various organizations since then. We're now currently owned by a company out of Detroit called Our Media, H-O-U-R, and they own Los Angeles Magazine, Atlanta Magazine, Detroit Magazine, Minneapolis. They have various city magazines. So as a city magazine, our role, I feel like our role is to try to figure out a slightly different path in providing information in this go-go media world of 24/7 on your phone, constant barrage of information, what is the role of a print magazine that comes out once a month? How can we still be relevant and fit into everything else that's out there and still present something different and interesting? And ultimately, that's my job as the editor-in-chief, is to figure out the right tone that we take and also the right mix of things that we present. And so there's a lot, there are two spectrums really that I operate on. One is the idea of being timely. Certainly we want, the world is changing. As I said, it changes every 5 minutes. So we certainly want to be on top of that. We want to present timely information. At the same time, we come out once a month, and frankly, we send the magazine to the printer about 3 weeks before we actually come out. So we have a fairly long lead time in terms of how we have to decide what to write and then to edit it, present it, and then cross our fingers that while the magazine is at the printer, the world hasn't changed. But I've been in print for a long time, and I know that the downside of print is that the second the ink hits the page, it's out of date because something else has changed. So how do we present information that will still be interesting and relevant, even if you read it 3 weeks or maybe a month after it's been written? And so I think about that all the time. So again, this mix of being timely, but also timeless perhaps. And then also the spectrum of, and this is a good example, to talk about issues that are relevant and everyone's talking about: the pandemic, Black Lives Matter, politics, the restaurant scene, that sort of thing. While at the same time, I know that most of you, probably a lot of you like me, we read for fun. And so, not everything you read has to be about the news of the day. There is a place for distraction and reading for the sake of entertainment. And so we also want to present information that maybe gets your mind off of your problems. So again, we want to have a mix of things in the magazine that are both newsy, but also, I don't know if I want to use the word distracting, but at least, entertaining in and of themselves. And so that's kind of what we do every day. We try to figure out the right mix of that. We have a website, we have Facebook and Twitter and all those, Instagram and all that kind of thing that we use to be a little bit more timely and to write about things that happened yesterday or the day before. And we know that there's a place for that. But really at our core, what we're about is writing for print and writing generally, hopefully, more thoughtful, more interesting, more in-depth kinds of things that maybe you wouldn't find anywhere else. That's the other thing I think about all the time too, is where do we fit into the local media scene? When people are looking for information, where do they go? And I think most of us, when we're looking for daily information, there are certainly plenty of sources for that. The Enquirer, the Business Courier, WVXU, television, that kind of thing. So again, knowing that if something breaking news has happened, you will probably already know it by the time this issue comes out. Where can we fit into that where maybe we can provide a little bit more context, we can go a little deeper? What I try to do is a little bit of also looking backward and looking forward, and this I think is a good example of that. So we'll get into that in a second. But how does this fit into the historical context of Cincinnati? Cincinnati's a city that has an amazing history, and we still celebrate it today in everything from architecture to the arts to business. So how does this fit into the context of what's happened in the past? And then also, if we can't be right on the cutting edge of the present, then maybe we can also take the opportunity to look ahead a little bit. So can we ask questions about where is this all headed? What's next? Here's some ideas about this topic that maybe you'll hear about in the next 6 months. So again, to try to use basically our print to our advantage. And I hope that those are the kinds of stories that you're not going to find anywhere else in Cincinnati. And again, it's also very local too. So I'm sure you all have magazine subscriptions that you like to read. And on a national level, those will give you insight into certain things. But I hope that we're being the magazine of record for Cincinnati, that we're giving you the kind of information that you're not going to find anywhere else. And so every day I think about all of those sort of variables, and then within that we try to say, okay, then what are we going to, the other thing is every month, once we print this magazine, the next month we start out with 112 blank pages that we have to fill. So what do we write about next month? And what do people want to know about? What are they talking about? What are we gonna say that they don't already know or that they haven't already heard somewhere else? And so what that does is that leads me to this particular issue, and I just wanted to maybe walk through this briefly and tell you how we put this together, and maybe some of the highlights that I feel like are the highlights of this particular issue, and I think that might explain a little bit better what I'm trying to say about what our role is in the media world. And then once I do that, let's just open it up for questions and see what everybody wants to talk about and what I can help with, any kind of insight into the media world here in Cincinnati. So first of all, the first thing we did is this is the cover. It's very simple. It has a heart with an illustration from a local artist named James Billiter. And this image actually, he had already done himself, and it was out, and he had put it on shirts, he had put it on posters. So we borrowed this from him because he's a local artist, and we wanted him to have some credit. And on the cover, we just simply did a very simple headline. It says, "We've bounced back before, we'll do it again." So the point of this was, again, with this pandemic situation changing every 5 minutes, what can we do where we're not, the minute that we write this, it's not out of date? And certainly the one thing that's not going to change is the past. So we decided to start with the past. So what we did was we picked 5 times in Cincinnati's history where we felt, and we could have done more than 5, but we just narrowed it down to 5, where we thought there were disasters of some sort that Cincinnati overcame. And actually, there were some silver linings in all of these, and in some cases, the city actually progressed afterwards. They developed new technology or new ways of thinking that actually helped the city down the road. Again, with the idea is, if we've done this 5 times in the past, or 10 times, that may be 2 things, really. One, this isn't the worst thing that's ever happened to us. It may end up being that way, but right now, there have been the world and history has been full of a lot of challenging times. And then secondly, again, if we somehow pulled together and were able to get through these past struggles, that hopefully we can do the same today. And that was sort of the underlying reason for doing that. So the 5 issues that we pulled out, well, this was the beginning of it. We called it Weathering the Storm. And James Billiter, the artist for the cover, also did the little riverboat on the waves going through the storm with the sun kind of peeking out beyond. But the 5 that we picked, some of them I think you're going to know, and maybe a couple that are new to you. But 1884 courthouse riot. This was a time when the politics in Cincinnati were corrupt. A lot of juries were bought off. Business, politics, the police, the legal system was all intertwined. And there was a particular murder trial where the young man had actually signed a signed confession that he had done it. There were tons of witnesses that said he did it, and the jury acquitted him. And it turned out that the jury had been, at least the majority of the jury had been bought off by the defense attorney. And there was, as a result of that, there was a huge meeting in Music Hall, 1884, where all the citizens got together and they said, well, we're going to have to do something about this system. This is crazy. This is not right. And as these sort of meetings end up, sometimes it turned into a shouting match. And then all of a sudden, before it was all over with, the cry came up from the crowd, let's go to the courthouse, and we're going to hang them ourselves. So they marched to the courthouse, set it on fire, burned it down. There was a huge, they called in the militia from Dayton, who started indiscriminately firing into the crowd. Ended up 50 people, more than 50 people were killed in this riot. The courthouse did burn down, and a new courthouse was eventually built on the same site. So besides the fact that it was a horrible incident, the end result of this was apparently one of the guys who was in the crowd that night, who was one of the instigators of the riot, was a guy named George Cox, who later became Boss Cox. And what happened was there was a reform effort that happened right after this riot that did sweep out a lot of the politicians, but George Cox swept in. There was a void in power. He set up his own machine. So this isn't quite a cause and effect, but it did eventually, as probably most of you know, in the 1920s, resulted in the Charter Committee, a new government for Cincinnati, the good government people. Boss Cox was eventually put out. So this isn't a straight line between the riot and perhaps government reform, but it did sort of meander its way over several decades. The next one that we talked about was, and this is probably the most relevant, was the 1918 Spanish flu pandemic. As you probably know, 5,000 people in Cincinnati alone died. As you can see in both of these photos, the soldiers on the right and the barber on the left are wearing masks. What was interesting to us, and I'm sure those of you who have studied this know, a lot of things haven't changed. I mean, the main way to deal with this back then was wear masks, social distancing. They closed the schools, closed businesses. There was a lot of pressure to reopen the businesses, so the mayor reopened them. There was a second spike in the flus that winter, shut the schools back down again. And the pandemic actually took about 6 to 9 months to really work its way out. And so what came out of that was just certainly the recognition of how a pandemic can certainly impact a community. And again, Cincinnati was one of the cities that actually was a little bit more proactive than others with this mask wearing and social distancing. So our death toll, although it was huge, 5,000, was a lot less than a lot of other cities. So, is anyone in charge today recalling or remembering what happened 100 years ago? I don't know. I don't know if they're taking cues from that at all. But certainly, here's a pandemic, apples to apples comparison to what we're going through today. It didn't destroy the city. It was bad. But again, I found it ironic that the solution was a lot of what we're trying today, and that there was a backlash again, and then there was a second wave. So history seems to be repeating itself. But this was, like I said, this was the most apples to apples comparison. We also looked at the 1937 flood, which was the worst flood in the city's history. That bottom picture is the Roebling Bridge, and you can see, I think, how high up the Ohio River level is to it. And the top picture is north side, that area where 3 or 4 roads come together in north side, and there's 2 guys in a rowboat. It was the worst flood in Cincinnati's history, and it happened in January of 1937. The flood reached all the way up to as far as Carthage and Hartwell. You've probably seen pictures of Crosley Field underwater with a rowboat rowing through the middle of Crosley Field. This affected both sides of the river. So what came out of this, and this is something that's a little bit, I think, easier to see cause and effect, but certainly everyone got a lot more serious about the downtown riverfronts on both sides of the river. The U.S. Corps of Engineers offered to build levees on both sides of the river, and on Kentucky they accepted it. And so, as you probably know, there are levees along, Bellevue, Newport, Covington, Ludlow, those kinds of things. On the Cincinnati side, we decided not to take up their offer of building levees because, if you remember, back in those days, the warehouse district went down to the river, the produce area, all those kinds of things, and a lot of that was going to have to be destroyed in order to build up the riverfront, and they didn't want to do that. So, of course, that area got flooded again and again and again. But eventually, and you've seen this now, Where the Banks is today, I'm sure you've seen how they're all built on top of parking garages. And even Riverfront Stadium, when it was built down there, it was built up on top of parking garages. And that is the flood protection for the Cincinnati side. That top level of the garage is above, I think it was 65 feet. Whatever that top level was of the 37 flood, they went up above that. And so if we have a repeat of that flood, the idea is that the garages would flood, but none of the buildings above it or the stadiums or any of that kind of thing would flood. And that's also part of the reason why they built Smale Riverfront Park, the Serpentine Wall that you've seen. I mean, that was all done as sort of flood mitigation, but really the Banks lifting it up is really sort of the main result of the 37 flood. The next one we talked about was 1974, the tornadoes that came through, and particularly the one in Xenia that everyone knows about. But we also had tornadoes here in Cincinnati. And part of the reason why, I mean, this was one of the worst. It was in April of '74. It was one of the worst tornado happenings in the Midwest ever. But part of the reason it was so bad was that there really wasn't much of a warning system in place in 1974. The Cincinnati airport had weather radar, but the Dayton airport did not. There were no sirens. There was nothing like that. And what happened was, when a tornado came through northern Kentucky and hit near the airport, knocked out the power, and so the weather radar at CVG was knocked out. So the one weather radar we had was out of commission because the power went out. So this is a picture of the tornado that hit Xenia, and it flattened that town. But the reason we chose this was, again, this is a natural disaster. It happened like that, but Xenia and other communities had to rebuild, and there was a lot of discussion about, well, how do we rebuild? But one of the big things that came out of this was the technology and the science of weather systems, and apparently the U.S. weather, NASA actually got involved, but the idea of Doppler radar was developed shortly after this from technology that was developed as they were studying better ways to predict tornadoes. They put in weather radar at all kinds of airports, also with its own generators so they wouldn't be knocked out by power shortages, and then, as you know, put up a whole system of sirens and such. So it's a shame that it took, obviously, a disaster like this to happen for that to finally occur. But today things are a lot better, as you probably know. Every time there's a crack of thunder, I mean, sirens are going off, and your TV is on, and your phone's buzzing, and it's crazy. It's like the world's coming to an end. But it's better than not knowing that a F5 tornado is about to hit you. And then, just for a little variety's sake, and also to get something a little bit more current, the fifth historical thing we looked at was 2001 in Cincinnati, the riots, the vandalism, and then the curfews that we had. Again, that's a little bit, now we decided this long before the George Floyd situation and Black Lives Matter, but we thought this was important because this was more of a man-made, this is not a natural disaster. This is something that had been brewing for a while. And, but some good came out of this. The police department was under a consent decree from the Department of Justice, and they've reformed the police a lot. There's a lot better community police interaction these days. I mean, what the riots were about is a young man named Timothy Thomas had been shot by police. He was being chased, and he was the 15th unarmed African-American man who'd been killed by Cincinnati police in a fairly short number of years. And that hasn't happened since 2001. The police department has been reformed. They're not perfect. Nobody's perfect, but it's gotten better. And then the other thing we talk about that came out of this was 3CDC was formed as a result of the riots, because a lot of it happened, a lot of the property damage and a lot of the rioting happening in over the Rhine. And the business community, and some of you were probably involved in this, got involved with Mayor Charlie Lucan, who was the mayor at the time. And they said, we've got to invest in downtown and in over the Rhine. We've got to make the area safer. We've also got to come up with more opportunities. And so they formed 3CDC. They hired Steve Leeper from Pittsburgh. And so a lot of what's happened in Over the Rhine under 3CDC's watch has been a direct result of this. And again, we just wanted to, you've got 1884 on one end and you've got 2001. So again, ultimately, what I was trying to show with these historic things is that we've faced some bad situations. Some have been our own fault, some have been man-made, some have been natural disasters, and we struggled, a lot of people suffered, a lot of people died, but we've managed to come out of it, and in some cases, and hopefully again in this case, we'll come out of it maybe in better shape, maybe we'll learn something that will help us down the road. I think we all want to know that sacrifice is worth it in the long run, that something good comes out of the bad times. None of us know, but I like to be optimistic and I like to be hopeful that, and again, this is not a pie in the sky. This really happened, and so hopefully history can repeat itself. So that's why we did this particular group of stories. And then beyond that, to get more in the current day, we interviewed, this story was, there was a writer named John Fleischman who was over in Italy visiting his daughter. He goes every winter. His daughter has lived in Italy for a long time. And he happened to be in this little town in northern Italy called Bergamo, which is where his daughter lives. And if anyone remembers, in March, right after China and Wuhan in China, the next place that was sort of the first place outside of China that really got hit by coronavirus was northern Italy. And it happened to be this particular town that he was in was the center, sort of ground zero for northern Italy's explosion of COVID-19 cases. So I had him, I didn't know him, but I was put in touch with him, and he wrote us a letter from Lombardy that sort of talked about what it's like and how he was in February, actually, was Zooming or Skyping with friends back here in Cincinnati, and he was telling them about, you better get ready, this thing is coming, this is terrible. There are ambulances day and night in our little town. He was never infected, and his daughter or his grandkids weren't, but the whole town shut down, and he said, you need to get ready, this is coming. And of course, nobody here knew what he was talking about and didn't believe him. And so anyway, he wrote this in May, and it was really fascinating. He'd been trying to get home since April. He just couldn't get any flights, they couldn't get out, they couldn't. Eventually, he did get home. Right as while this, I was saying earlier about things that happened while we're at the printer. While this was at the printer in mid-June, he and his wife got home. So anyway, it's an interesting story, just sort of life on the ground in Italy. And then we talked to some current folks. So on the left, that's Mayor Cranley. On the right, that's Garen Colvin, who's the CEO of St. Elizabeth. And we chose 5 people just to sort of represent different facets of current world. And obviously, John Cranley being the mayor of Cincinnati, I wanted to get a little bit behind the scenes with him about how he and other cities coordinated, or maybe they competed for medical equipment. It turns out they were very cooperative. He said he was on a call every day with Governor DeWine in the first 2 months of the crisis, every day, including Saturday and Sunday. He and the mayors of the 7 largest cities in Ohio would have a call with DeWine every single day. And then he just talked about a little bit behind the scenes about what they did. And one of the things he feels fortunate that they did very early on, he said they put in, city council approved a line of credit with a bank for $150 million. They were one of the first cities to do that, just in case they needed money to sort of put them through the budget that was, he kind of got a sense pretty early on that the budget was going to crash. And so the city of Cincinnati's had been able to borrow money and kind of keep things going that way. On the right, Garen is, like I said, CEO of St. Elizabeth. They converted their St. Thomas Hospital into just a all COVID wing. They redid, they took 4 floors, and the entire building had interconnected heating and air conditioning systems, and they got in, they disconnected them from each floor, so every floor would have independent airflow, would have independent temperature controls and such. And so the entire hospital became a ICU unit. And he talked about how he did that and how he would go to the hospital, to St. Thomas, and try to cheer up the nurses and the doctors, and they ended up cheering him up. And he said the attitude has been very strong. We also interviewed Renee Mahaffey Harris on the left, who runs the Center for Closing the Health Gap, which is focused on African American health in Cincinnati. And we wanted to talk to her about this idea that COVID was impacting minority communities in greater numbers, and what was her efforts to try to get attention for that, to get in front of the governor and the mayor, and also try to get more resources for African American communities. And then on the right, that's Chris Milligan, who's the CEO of the Opera. He had just been named in the spring the new CEO of the Opera. He's been at the Opera for a while. And basically his first big decision he had to make was to cancel the opera season this summer, which was going to be the 100th anniversary opera season. I mean, of all the things to happen. And so we talked to him about just the heartbreak of doing that. And but again, the opera's been around 100 years. He's looking at the long view, and you know, it's terrible, but it's not the end of the world, certainly. And then the fifth one we talked to was Jose Salazar. He's the chef on the left. He owns 3 restaurants here in town. Mita's, he owns Salazar up and over the Rhine, and then next to Findlay Market, he owns a little restaurant called Goose and Elder. And he was very much in the forefront of obviously he had to shut his restaurants down, but one of the things that he did is at Mita, which is the restaurant that's right across over here on the other corner here at 5th and Race, is he kept his staff employed, and they would cook every day, and they would make meals and box them up. And then anyone in Cincinnati and Northern Kentucky who was a restaurant worker who'd been basically lost their job because all the restaurants closed could come to his restaurant and get dinner for free. He did this for 2 months, 7 days a week. He ended up preparing over 100,000 meals. He did get some grant money for it, which he then used to pay his people to keep them employed. But he fed basically the restaurant workers who had all lost their jobs. And his restaurants are now reopened. And so again, he talked about that and what that experience was like. So that's basically what we did. As you can see, a little bit of history, a little bit of what happened now, and then a little bit of looking ahead with the idea, without hitting people over the head with it, that we're optimistic that we can get back to normal, that this isn't going to be the end of our world, even though so many things are uncertain. I feel like that was a good message, and that's certainly a message I believe in, and a message I wanted to be a part of with this issue. And again, it kind of fits into, well, what do we do that's somebody else, that's unique to Cincinnati Magazine that maybe you're not going to see somewhere else? So I hope that you take the opportunity to read it. It's on our website. We also, besides this, I mean, you can find this at Kroger stores and Joseph Beth and all those normal CVS and such. But we also, if you go to CincinnatiMagazine.com, we have a digital edition of this where you just basically click on it. It's like a series of PDFs, and you can just read it, click, and the page literally flips like this. And you can read it on the website if you'd like as well. So that's my story, and that's why I'm here, and that's what I hope to contribute to the conversation, at least today, and what what we're all trying to figure out as we get through. So if there are any questions, I'm happy to talk about anything you want to, either the magazine or media in general. Yes. Thank you. Thank you. So they wanted me to repeat the questions because there are people watching this on Facebook Live. So the question was, how do I think Cincinnati media in general did in covering the pandemic and the riots and the Black Lives Matter movement? Did they stick to the facts? Did they do a good job at that, or did they sensationalize it? And I mean, the quick answer is yes, they did both. And certain media are better at sensationalizing than others. I think certainly television, just by its nature, with needing to have pictures and needing to have visuals, I think it's a lot easier to sensationalize things that way because, whether it's a building on fire or it's a police officer struggling with a protester or it's somebody with a mask on and they're all up in their gear and they're sticking a thing down somebody else's nose, to do a COVID test. Those are very visual pictures, and that's what television does. So I think, I'm not saying they do that on purpose, but that's just their reason for existing is to provide that visual. I think print in general, again, whether you're coming out once a day or you're on the website, I think just the act of observing and then going back somewhere and sitting down and writing it up, it just gives you a little time to think about it. Of course, I'm biased because that's what I do for a living. So of course, I think that we're awesome at what we do. But I just know that it gives you a little perspective, maybe a little bit of time to think about it, and to present the information in a way that gives you a little chance to sort of consider. I am not a big fan of, as you can tell probably because of what I do with the magazine, I'm not a big fan of this 24/7 news cycle of just every 5 minutes you've got to update the story. I think that really leads to a sensationalized media because it's the media equivalent of squirrel, of this. It's like squirrel, what the shiny object that's in front of you, and then let's just throw that together. And again, the 24/7 news cycle also, it really takes that sort of thoughtfulness out because there is no thoughtfulness. It's like I see a squirrel and I'm going to write a story, and then 5 seconds later it is live. Nobody's edited it. Nobody even probably ran spell check on it. And I took a picture with my phone, and that's on, and then that counts as a news story. And that's just not. I just don't think that's a healthy way to for any kind of community. But it is the reality that we live in. I would say I learned a lot from local media about COVID. I think they did a good job because that was a story that changed a lot, but still the story has developed over time. I think the riots and the protests are I think it's so much easier to sensationalize that because, again, there's a lot of visual, there's not a lot of context, nobody is stopping to talk to you and explain what's going on, just a lot of action, a lot of heat and a lot of fire. So I guess in general I would say I think we've done a fairly good job with COVID and maybe not such an illuminating job with the protests. Yes. Yeah. Thank you. Yeah. So the question was, how do we measure the audience's response to what we do and maybe what they want us to do? And there's really two different parts of the business model, but the main business model for us is we sell advertising in the print magazine or online because the advertisers want to reach our audience. And the only reason we have an audience is because we are engaging with them. We give them something to read. And so the other part of us that's a little different than some is that we have paid subscriptions. So everyone who receives the magazine, for the most part, is paying for it. So that's quite different than, let's say, City Beat, where I was the editor for many years. And, where we would just put them in racks or boxes, and you'd walk by and you'd pick one up. There's a different reason we do that, and that was because we wanted to have the access to people. But the fact that somebody's paying whatever they pay in a subscription, $1 an issue for a year, is still a commitment, and they receive it at home. So there is a commitment there. And we have about 30,000 subscribers, more or less. Those numbers fluctuate, but I think we certainly haven't seen any attrition in readership numbers from subscribers, and I think part of that is people are stuck at home and they're looking for things to do, just like they're on their phone and they're on television, they want things to read. The magazine in general comes to their home. We have had some attrition from ad sales, as you can imagine. A lot of companies are hunkering down, trying to save money, trying to save their marketing budget. But I think we're fortunate that most of our advertisers are not quite event-oriented or restaurant-oriented, where I have nothing to advertise. I mean, we do have some of that, like the Sharonville Convention Center is a big advertiser. Obviously, they don't have any events right now. But most of them, we have car dealers, we have jewelers, we have more lifestyle, furniture stores, that kind of thing. And they've all, in general, been doing okay. So I think we're down about probably 20 to 25%, but that's a whole lot better than being down 100%. But as far as readers go, we really don't get a ton of feedback from print readers. Where we do get the feedback is online, and the metrics are easy to come by there. Facebook, our website, Twitter, Instagram, that kind of thing. All the metrics are built in. You can see what stories are being read, which ones are being shared. We have a daily newsletter, email newsletter we send out. Every day we can see what percentage got opened, got shared, got clicked on. And so what that basically has told us is it's led us to in two different ways, but it's the same two ways that we were in the same boat beforehand, which is people are interested in COVID and Black Lives Matter and are the restaurants reopening and that kind of thing. But they're also our top stories consistently, even today online, still tend to be the stories right about homes that are for sale. And I mean, people love that stuff. They want to see really nice homes and what's on the market, and it's crazy. I mean, and even again today, last week, our top 3 most read stories on our website were home stories. So okay, that's fine. I get it. People are, again, they want a distraction. They want to sort of get out and think about some other things. So that does lead us to make some decisions based on really more of the online metrics. Yes? Well, I think, the old saying in the newspaper business was, or TV, if it bleeds, it leads. So any story about a car accident or a fire or a murder would always be the lead story on television or on the front page of the newspaper. I think you're right. Anytime you talk to somebody, people say, well, I don't like that. But clearly that's not really happening, because I'd like to think, and I know people who are at television stations, and I know the editor of the Enquirer, they're smart people. I mean, they wouldn't be focusing on those kinds of stories if they weren't really getting attention. And they're the same as us. They have websites, they have ways to measure. And so stories about negative things, about, again, bad things that happen to other people, about people who are convicted of crimes, or all those kinds of things, or the latest story about Donald Trump. They know they do get responses. And I know all of us would like to say that we don't, and maybe we don't. Maybe none of you do. But the friends who tell you that they don't, I think they do look at it. Because the media wouldn't be running with these stories if they didn't have proof that they were working. Now, whether that's good enough or whether that's right is a whole different conversation. I'd like to, there have been a lot of experiments with, quote unquote, good news or positive news. I'd like to think what we're doing here is positive news, but it's about a negative situation. And just because something's negative doesn't mean it's not true. I mean, COVID-19 is pretty bad. And I mean, not saying that it's bad isn't going to make it any better. Now, we don't have to dwell on it, and we don't have to hammer it into everyone's head that we're all going to die. But I think you have to, any kind of conversation still has to acknowledge that this is a tough situation. And again, I'd like to think that one approach you could have, which is what we tried to do, is, okay, this is a bad situation. I can tell you, I hope that we get through this, but another way that we could do it is to show that we did in the past, and hopefully that is some sort of, not necessarily proof, but is evidence that maybe we'll get through it again. I don't know if that's necessarily positive, but it's true. It did happen. We did get through it. Cincinnati still exists, even after those 5 things and plenty more, and hopefully Cincinnati 150 years from now will still exist, even after this.
John, I have a question from,
Yeah.
I'm going to take the mic 1 second.
Oh, yeah.
So we have a number of people watching on Facebook Live, and again, welcome if you are on Facebook Live. And we have a question from one of our members, Doug Bolton. And his question, you might know Doug, where do you think the journalism business model is headed?
Well, if I had the answer to that, I mean, nobody has the answer to that. Everyone is struggling with that very answer because, and the bottom line, or the real struggle for us is that, again, as the world changes and everyone gets information on their telephone now or on their computer, and only people with gray hair like me are reading print magazines, and I can't get anybody, you know, it seems like anybody I talk to who's younger than 35 years old, when I talk to them about the magazine, the answer they give me is, oh yeah, I always see that when I go over to my parents' house. So, so there's no going back. I mean, the phones and the digital world is the present and is the future. The problem on the business model is that for a variety of reasons that are too much to get into, that advertisers have really devalued the audience that we can deliver online. So for instance, let's say we have 30,000 print subscribers, and let's say we charge $1,000 for an ad in the magazine. We don't, we charge more than that, but let's just say we do. To reach 30,000 people on our website, we might be able to get somebody to pay us $100. And the reason that is because that's what everybody else charges. And so much of the economy online, both the user experience, but also, again, the business experience, is everything is free online. And the information is free, and if you're going to put a paywall up, and I know everyone's tried it, the Enquirer's tried it, WCPO has tried it, the Business Courier has tried it, New York Times tries it, Wall Street Journal. There's some that work, you know. If you have something like the New York Times or Wall Street Journal and people think that's worth $15 a month, that works. But even the Enquirer, you know, who has tried that for so long, I think they really struggle with getting people to pay even $3 or $4 or $5 a month to get their information online. And so it's just this sort of the conventional wisdom is that everything should be free online, and therefore you should provide it to me for free as an end user, but then also as an advertiser to connect with them, I'm not going to pay you anywhere near what you can get for the equivalent print version. And the other thing that happens there too is that, as you all know, businesses have their own Facebook pages, their own social media, and they're communicating directly with their own customers, and they don't need us as the middleman. They don't need Cincinnati Magazine or the Enquirer or Channel 9 to help connect them. They already have their own mailing lists. And although, again, that's a whole other discussion, I could argue that you're going to reach a wider audience and new people who aren't already your friends and aren't already your core customers. But that's really what it comes down to, is there just isn't enough money flowing through the online world that can sustain us and can sustain us so that we can have full-time writers, full-time editors, full-time designers. And that's why, unfortunately, you see so many media entities when push comes to shove, they lay off reporters, they lay off on-air anchors, which to me is ridiculous, because why would you think that the answer to customers wanting more from you is to actually give them less? But that's just the reality, is the money just isn't there. And Doug, as you probably know, used to be the publisher of the Business Courier. And if he had an answer, he'd probably still be at the Business Courier. So we're all trying to figure it out. There just isn't any real answer because, again, the digital world and Facebook and all those have just sort of driven everyone down to this zero bottom line where everyone expects everything for free, and therefore price, as you know, price equals value. And so if everything is free, people just don't give it that same value that they would, and they're just not willing to pay for it. I don't have any answer. I mean, we're going to continue to focus on our core and hope that I can convince 35-year-olds to read the magazine, because someday they'll be 50-year-olds, and we'll need them to be our core audience. So, well, of course you get what you pay for. Of course. Of course. The statement is you get what you pay for, and that's exactly right. But again, people, they see, well, if you're going to charge me $1 and I can get equivalent information for free, but the question is somebody in their basement at their mom's house putting together a blog equivalent to the New York Times? Some people would say it is. I don't think it is. Of course. Thank you. You're welcome. Thank you very much. I appreciate it.
Stick around for a minute over here. So, John, thank you so much for coming today to speak to us. I think it's obvious from what you've presented that Cincinnati Magazine has a perspective that we don't get elsewhere. It was wonderful to hear a sense of context for what our city and region are going through right now, and to really have some confidence that we will get through it, however long it takes. But that's not the kind of thing you get in the daily media. And so thank you for sharing that. One of the things that I could really hear in your presentation is you really care about the Cincinnati community. We in Rotary really care about the Cincinnati community. We're all looking for ways to improve the lives of others in the community and improve our own lives in the process. So that's who we are. That's our mission as a club. And we don't just focus on lives, improving lives in our community, but as you know, Rotary is an international organization. We are focused on a number of global issues. One of our key focus areas is fighting disease. And we have been thinking about a pandemic right now. We have been since 1988 fighting a global battle to eradicate polio. And a lot of people in this country, we think, well, what's the issue? It hasn't been an issue, but it is still an issue. It would be wonderful to finally eradicate a disease and not have to think about it coming back. So that's the campaign we've been involved with since 1988. And in honor of you speaking today, we are going to make a donation to the global End Polio Now campaign that Rotary International runs. So thank you very much. And also, you had a chance to hear our four-way test at the beginning of the meeting, which is our ethical standard. And we've got a token, a four-way test coin, to give you of our ethical values. But again, John, thank you so much for coming, being with our club today. It's great to have you here, and hope you come back. And with that in mind, let's have a great weekend, whatever we do, okay? And hope to see everyone back either here next Thursday or join us online. Let's go out and really live the right way and help the lives of others as we do. Meeting adjourned.